Okay, this will be proper maintenance of woody plants. We did proper planting last week. Start right. Start with a healthy plant. This is the thing where I see all the time. It's really not necessary to mulch. There are some benefits to a little bit of mulch, and they're listed here. But definitely do not overload the mulch. Just a couple of inches is really all that you need. You want to ideally do 2 to 3 times with the mulch the branch spread of the tree, if at all possible. Keeping that mulch under the drip line, that keeps the mowers away from things, that allows moisture to sink in a little bit better. It's less competition with the turf, those sorts of things. I get it's not always possible. Do not cover the trunk. And don't use plastic. I know all these places are like plastic, landscape fabric. Don't do it. Get away from landscape fabric. It's terrible. It doesn't allow water to penetrate. The plastic definitely doesn't allow water to penetrate. Changes the temperature of the soil. It changes all of the microorganisms in the soil. All right, so a little bit of mulch, preferably an organic mulch. We all know that the trees have a benefit, and we ask a lot of them. We ask them to provide us with shade. We ask them to be beautiful. We know there are social benefits. You can actually reduce crime by planting trees. There are community benefits. Everybody loves walking in the park. We can measure the heating and cooling changes with properly planted trees. You can find this image on the internet. It's very readily available. You don't need to memorize this, but just glance around and take a look that you can see that planting trees in different areas, different types of plants, can absolutely reduce the impact of heating and cooling and can provide windbreaks. There's lots and lots of things that trees can do in the landscape. But this is an investment. It's not just the initial cost of the tree itself and the planting costs and the watering costs and the leaf and branch removal and the tree disposal and removal at some point. Those are just some of the costs, but you do need to maintain the plant throughout its life. And that costs a lot more than simply mowing or cutting your perennials back or that sort of thing. If you get into arboriculture, then you'll recognize that trees have value. And so that if you lose a tree, you're going to have an estimator come in to discuss how much the tree was worth. And that's going to be based on its size, what species it was or is, its condition, and its location. So I'm not expecting you to become an expert on this, but to recognize that these organisms have value in our landscape and not just the value of the cost of the tree. So we want to look at the different conditions. This would detract from the value of an otherwise nice tree. It's a nice, good size. It seems to be in reasonable shape, but this is not normal as far as the bark is concerned. So this large frost crack would actually reduce the value of this particular plant. You want to make sure that the plants are the right plant. This is a very healthy chestnut. No one in their right mind should plant a chestnut in a front yard. I don't know if you've ever been around a chestnut. Their fruits are so spiky they will pop your tires, and they stick to the grass, and the flowers smell so bad. No, it's awful. They're pollinated by flies, and so they have to smell like stuff that flies like, and flies like dead things. So in a front yard, this is the wrong tree, despite the fact that it's very healthy. Their pruning and their condition is going to make a difference. This was a company. This was actually up in Medina. And the people on the 3rd floor were complaining about that they couldn't see out the windows. So they came and they hacked these trees. These were otherwise very nice trees. So now they're not worth as much because they're not in as good of condition. This is the big thing that we see all the time. I'm fairly confident growers don't do this intentionally, but nearly every single tree will be planted too deep. Where's the flare? You don't see the flare on these at all. You're probably going to have to dig down at least 2 inches, maybe as many as 6 or 7 inches to find the flare, and that's what needs to be at ground level. The species makes a difference. See these reddish orange seeds that are all over the place? Oh my goodness, every single one of these things will germinate and cause problems. They're more than happy to create lots and lots of new trees. So while it might be a nice looking tree, that might be something that's ornamental, that's a weed. It's going to cause problems. So a tree that doesn't necessarily add any value. This might look really weird, But this tree is perfectly home in wet areas. So this goes back to the phrase that you hear all the time in horticulture: right plant, right place. This is the right plant in the right place because it's perfectly capable of handling these wet locations. This is another one that's right plant, right place. It's a good plant. It might need a little bit of pruning, but it's a good plant. It's planted in the right place, and it looks healthy. You have to think of the mature size. This is a very mature paper birch. We normally will say that paper birch gets 35 to 50 feet tall. This one is 70 feet tall. And look at the trunk and the number of trunks. If you planted this up close to a house, it's way exceeded expectations as far as size is concerned. And that's going to cause problems both for the homeowner and for the tree. This is a national champion hackberry. This right here, that's a 4-foot fence at the base of this tree. It's perfectly suited to life on a prairie like this particular area. Wide open, sweeping winds. That's where it grew up. That's where they evolved. You can see the size of the trunk that they can get to. Again, this is a perfect location for it. So you want to make sure you do your research on your plants so that you know you're planting the right thing in the right location and the conditions are right for that plant. Trees are an investment, and their value increases with age. At some point, despite the fact that we can assign a monetary value to it, it's almost impossible to replace that particular tree. So if you want to look at the health of a tree, you want to look at the new leaves and buds. You want to look at the leaf size. Are they smaller than they should be? Are they larger than they should be? How much twig growth has there been? How much crown dieback is there? Is it growing an average of 3 inches a year and it's done that for the last 5 years? Or is it growing more like 8 inches every year and then suddenly this year it only grew 2? Those are things that you want to look at. So we want to look for reduced shoot growth and compare the past 3-4 years. You want to look at reduced leaf size if that's there. Look for trunk decay, crown dieback, deformed growth, conchs, which are mushrooms basically that are going to come out of the tree. You want to look for insect activity. These are all ways to see if a plant has been doing well. Has it been impacted by the weather? Has the homeowner done something like power washed the house that causes problems with chemicals in the soil? Look closely at these two trees. Right here on the left, that is an American elm. On the right is a Siberian elm. You can see their habits are vastly different, and you might look and see why people like the American elm a little bit better. But the Siberian elm is resistant to Dutch elm disease, and the American elm is doomed. Can you see why? Take a close look. Look in the upper portion of the tree, right there. There it is. That's Dutch elm disease. And that's all it takes for that tree to be doomed. That's Dutch elm disease in action. Fertilization isn't always necessary with our large trees, particularly if they're growing adequately. You have to understand the soil if you're going to fertilize your trees. Because if you throw a bunch of fertilizer on the ground and the pH is not right, that fertilizer is just going to get locked up in the soil. You need to understand the organic matter content and the nutrient availability if you're going to fertilize trees. You need to understand where the drip line is. Are you going to do soil injections? Are you going to do trunk injections? Are you going to try to do foliar applications? And if you're doing foliar applications, how large is the tree? It takes sometimes a lot more specialty equipment to do fertilization on our large trees. What we're learning about roots is they can extend 2 to 3 times the size of the canopy. So you can't just fertilize right around the edge of the canopy. You have to go way, way, way out. Lots of times if you're fertilizing your lawn, the trees can benefit from that, but you do have to pay attention to weed and feed products. This is an example right here of a pine tree that had an organic weed and feed applied to the lawn. And the organic claimed that it was safe for your trees, but it was a different chemical formula than an inorganic, and the tree happened to recognize this particular chemical formula and took it up, and the homeowner lost 40 large pine trees because of the turf weed and feed. Pruning is our most common tree maintenance, and this is pretty much the order that you want to look at. Go out through and get your dead stuff out of there, get anything that's diseased or insects, then prune for structure, and then prune for safety. The only reason you would change the order is if safety is a major concern. Oftentimes, pruning the dead out deals with your safety issue. But you have to remember that Pruning causes reduced photosynthesis. It also causes growth, and each species responds differently. We'd like to see our nurseries pruning our young trees. So this is a tree that should have been pruned to one trunk. Here's another one, should have been pruned to one trunk. So that's something that you have to think about because each cut changes the growth, and each cut causes damage that the tree has to heal and repair. The smaller the cut, the better off you are. We want to look at our branch collar. So there's your branch collar right there. There's your branch collar. Don't prune right here. Don't prune back at the trunk. You want to prune at the branch collar. You want to prune for establishing structure. This is going to provide the framework. You want to keep your strong branches 12 to 18 inches apart. And again, this is going to vary a little bit. So a pin oak, the Quercus palustris, might be a little bit different from a lacebark elm, the Ulmus parvifolia. But you want to look at the overall structure of the plant and then prune for appearance. Most species, you're going to want to have a single leader. You're going to want to space your branches apart. And the lowest branches, whether or not you remove those, is kind of what's going on with the tree. If you're mowing with large commercial mowing equipment, you're probably going to want to limb that up a little bit more than you might for a homeowner. We are going to talk a bit about topping, because topping is something that happens regularly. Just stop it. Just don't. It's terrible that the power company comes through and does this, because it's not a good thing. There's these myths about it, that it slows the tree growth. Nope, trees actually grow faster. It's cheaper. Nope, you have to repeat it every couple of years, and it weakens the tree. So the more you do it, the worse off the tree is. People go, oh, look at that tree. It's growing really fast. It must be thriving. No, new growth is weaker. It's a lot more susceptible to damage. Seeming to thrive and actually thriving, two totally different things. And finally, the big one is the tree's going to recover. No, it will never look right again. Never, ever. Topped trees are impacted for the rest of their life. These trees will never be the same ever again. I get sometimes you need to. I understand that. But you do have to keep in mind that these trees are not going to recover and look the same. Here's what we often see more in cities. The power company comes along and just hacks them all up, and they're always going to look funny. They're never going to be the same ever again. Is it possible to grow large trees in cities? Of course it is. Here's an example right here. If you're going to remove trees, you do have to start with the dead dying. They're irreparably hazardous. Are they causing harm to other trees? You need to allow for construction. Can they be replaced? What is the function in the landscape for that particular plant? And then finally, we want to look at a little bit of specialty pruning, because I've said over and over again, keep with the shape of the tree. Shape the tree naturally. Shape it normally. That's not always the case. There's lots and lots of different specialty pruning. This is an example of an espalier. This is where often fruit trees are grown flat for ease of harvest, but in this case, it's also really nice along a fence. This is a very specialty type of pruning. We don't see it very often in this country. It's basically topping the trees specifically to get that really broom-like, very, very fast growth. Pleaching is turning trees into a wall. So you can see that we have these regular trunks, and these trees are basically growing in a horizontal wall like this. Coppicing is something that you would do to shrubs. You might take them all the way down to the ground, force a lot of new growth. Lots of times our juvenile growth is more colorful. It flowers easier, it looks better, it takes up less space, so there might be a number of reasons that you would take a shrub down to the ground. Topiary, that's a big one. You know, people always you can prune into shapes and puppy dogs and kittens and chickens and all sorts of different things. Here's another example of topiary where you've got... Here's more of a normal example of a topiary. Here's a dog in the center, or a flower. You might see those at garden centers. And shaping or bending. This is a very, very specialty form of pruning and grafting and growing trees in very specific ways. This is a skill. It's an art form. It's something that you don't see very often. Although, if you look over on the left-hand side and you see the bonsai, that's a much more common way of pruning. Okay, as always, if you have questions, do not hesitate to get in touch.